Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the world of Russia's shadow fleet.
Ooh, yeah, Shadow Fleet. That's a good one.
Its sanctions and secrets and oil, and we've got a lot to get through, so let's get started.
Yeah, and what's so interesting here is it's almost like a whole nother oil market has just like popped up
Okay.
because of these sanctions, right? Like a whole hidden network under the surface of all the global energy stuff.
So, what exactly are we talking about when we say shadow fleet?
Okay, so picture this, right? Hundreds of these tankers, most of them kind of old,
Uh-huh.
crisscrossing all over the globe, just quietly moving millions of barrels of Russian oil.
Yeah.
It's all very hush-hush, skirting around the rules, and it's having a big effect on the global economy.
So this shadow fleet, it's like a direct response to all the sanctions that got put on Russia.
Exactly. So after the invasion of Ukraine, the Western nations, they put all these sanctions in place to try and limit how much money Russia was making from oil. So things like they banned insurance on Russian oil shipments and they set price caps.
Trying to squeeze them.
Yeah. The whole goal was to make it really hard for Russia to make money off their oil.
Oh, they didn't really back down, did they?
No, they
Mhm.
didn't. They adapted.
Clever.
And they started using this fleet of older tankers. And get this, they registered these tankers under flags of convenience.
Flags of convenience.
Yeah. It's like countries like Liberia or Panama, the Marshall Islands, places that aren't really known for, super strict maritime regulations.
Oh, so they're basically going undercover.
Yeah, exactly. It's like maritime undercover.
So how do they actually, stay hidden?
Well, they've got a few tricks up their sleeve. One is called flag hopping.
Flag hopping, what is that?
Okay, so imagine a tanker leaves Russia flying a Liberian flag right, then a week later it's hanging out near India, but now it's got a Panamanian flag.
Whoa.
Like magic, right?
Yeah.
Because it's super hard to track.
So shady.
And it gets even crazier. Some of these ships, they mess with their AIS transponders.
Those are the things that tell you where the ship is right.
Right, like broadcasting their location, and these guys, they just turn them off.
So they're trying to just disappear.
Vanish into thin air. One ship was tracked going dark near Portugal, and then days later it pops up near Sri Lanka.
What?
Yeah, the AIS was off, but they caught it on satellite transferring oil to another vessel.
Oh, wow. It's like a spy movie or something.
It really is.
So this whole thing about keeping the oil flowing, this isn't just about money for Russia, is it?
No, definitely not. It's about power.
Yeah.
Global influence. They're offering cheap oil to countries that need energy, like China and India,
Right.
and that helps them get around the sanctions and keep funding the war.
That puts China and India in a good spot, though, doesn't it?
It does. They get cheap energy while everyone else is dealing with inflation, gives them more leverage.
Yeah.
But this lack of transparency in the whole oil market, well, that affects everybody.
You mentioned that this affects us even here in Korea.
You bet you in Korea probably feel it most with your smartphones. Think about palladium. It's vital for semiconductors, and Russia's a big supplier. All this shadowy business disrupts the supply chains, and that can lead to delays and price hikes even for things like your phone.
So it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And it's not just electronics either. We're seeing disruptions with everything from aerospace, titanium, to even basic food security.
Oh.
This war in Ukraine and all the sanctions, well, it's a mess. And the shadow fleet just makes it even more complicated. Plus, there's the safety and environmental concerns.
Right. These tankers are old, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are old, outdated technology. They're basically accidents waiting to happen.
Ticking time bombs.
Yeah, and we've already seen an increase in oil spills because of them. Remember that incident near Crimea?
2 tankers crashed, wasn't it?
Yeah, and spilled like 10,000 tons of oil into the Black Sea.
That's horrible, not just for the environment, but for everyone who lives there, too.
Absolutely long-term consequences, and it shows what happens when safety gets ignored. Cut corners.
Totally. And all these longer routes that aren't regulated, they drive up shipping costs, too, right?
Sure, and that affects the price of goods everywhere, so everyone ends up paying for it, literally.
Okay, so we know this shadow fleet is a big deal, but is anyone trying to figure out what's really going on?
They are, and they're using some pretty high-tech stuff.
Like what?
AI and satellite data.
Whoa.
They're tracking ship movements and trying to find illegal ship-to-ship transfers. It's like a high-tech game of hide and seek.
So using technology to fight the shadow fleet, basically.
Exactly. And the data they're getting is pretty interesting. One report said that 55% of the ships leaving Russian ports back in September were part of the shadow fleet.
55%. Wow.
That's a lot. And another study found that just 11 shadow fleet tankers were responsible for 5% of Russia's oil exports.
So a small group can have a big impact.
Huge impact, and it shows how just a few players can really mess with the global oil market.
Are the sanctions even working, though?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of debate about that. Some people say they're not working anymore because Russia's adapted.
Right.
But others say that the sanctions are making Russia spend more on their own infrastructure, which hurts them in the long run. So it's a bit of a back and forth.
So everyone's trying to figure out their next move.
Exactly. It's high stakes, you know.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Like, what are the solutions to this?
Well, that's where it gets even trickier.
I bet. Let's talk more about that in the next part of our deep dive.
It's tough, trying to get all these countries to agree on how to handle something like the shadow fleet.
Yeah, like herding cats, right?
Exactly. Everyone's got their own interests, their own priorities. It's a lot to juggle.
For sure. But let's say we could somehow get everyone on board, to crack down on this shattered fleet. What would that even look like? What could we actually do?
Well, first off, we got to tighten up the rules on ship registration. It's way too easy for these ships to just, disappear and reappear with a new name.
Right, like those flags of convenience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got to make it harder for them to hide.
Make those ghost ships a little less ghostly.
Yeah, and we got to stop those illegal ship-to-ship transfers, like that tanker that went dark near Portugal and then popped up in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
We need better ways to keep an eye on things, catch them in the act.
Close those loopholes.
Exactly, plug those leaks.
Okay, so close the loopholes and shine a light on all this shady business. What about going after the money? The financial side of things, all those tricky transactions they use to hide where the money's coming from.
Oh, yeah. Following the money is crucial. I got to go after those shell companies, the offshore accounts, even the crypto stuff they're using to try and cover their tracks.
Right.
We need financial intelligence units all over the world working together, tracking these flows of money and exposing the people behind it all.
It's like detective work, right? Like piecing together all the clues to figure out who's really calling the shots.
Exactly. And there have been some successes. The U.S. Treasury Department, they sanctioned a bunch of companies and individuals linked to the shadow fleet. Yep. Hit them where it hurts their wallets, froze their assets, cut them off from the global financial system.
So there are consequences even if you're operating in the shadows.
Absolutely. You can't hide forever.
But let's talk about the ethical side of this for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get caught up in the politics and the money, but this isn't just some game, right?
No, it's not. It's about real people and real ecosystems that are being affected. We've talked about the safety risks, with those old tankers. The oil spills the danger to the crews, but the environmental impact goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
These ships, they don't care about pollution. They leave a trail of contamination everywhere they go.
We talked about those communities in Nigeria.
Exactly. Polluted water, destroyed
Yeah.
fishing grounds, health problems. It's a reminder that sometimes profit comes at a really high cost to the planet and the people on it.
And what about the crews on these ships? Are they being treated fairly?
That's another issue. The working conditions on these vessels are often terrible. Low pay, little protection. It's a hidden side of this whole shadow trade, and we can't ignore it.
So it's not just about tracking the oil, it's about the human costs too.
Exactly. We need to look at the whole picture.
Okay, so is it all about just stricter regulations and enforcement, or do we need like a whole new way of thinking about this?
That's a great question. And honestly, stricter rules and enforcement are part of the solution, but we also need to get to the root of the problem.
Which is?
Our dependence on fossil fuels, as long as there's a demand for oil, there will be people willing to break the rules to get it, cut corners, operate in the shadows.
So it's bigger than just stopping a few rogue tankers.
Much bigger. It's about changing how we produce and consume energy.
Moving away from oil.
Exactly. Transitioning to cleaner, more sustainable energy sources. That's not just about being good for the environment. It's about creating a fairer, more transparent energy system that's less vulnerable to this kind of shady business.
Breaking free from oil.
Exactly. And investing in a future powered by renewables.
But that's a long-term solution. What can we do right now to deal with this shadow fleet?
Well, one promising avenue is using technology. We talked about how AI and satellite imagery are being used to track these ships and expose what they're up to. Imagine expanding those efforts, creating a global network that makes it way harder for these shadow operators to hide.
So it's like shining a light on the cockroaches.
Exactly. They can't hide if the lights are on. And as we get more data, we can start to map out these networks, figure out who the key players are, and develop better strategies to disrupt their operations.
So technology is a big part of it, but we
Yeah.
still need international cooperation, tougher sanctions,
Yeah.
and people need to be held accountable, right?
Absolutely. It's a complex problem that needs a complex solution.
And it's going to take everyone working together, governments, businesses, individuals, to really tackle this challenge.
For sure.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still got more to cover in our deep dive, so stick with us as we explore how technology and data are being used to fight this shadow fleet. So we talk about needing like a multi-pronged approach, right, to tackle this shadow fleet thing. But I'm really curious about the tech side of things. You mentioned AI and satellites being used to like expose these shady dealings. Can you break that down a bit more?
Yeah, so imagine you've got this network of satellites up there, right? Just constantly scanning the oceans, taking pictures of every single ship, every little move they make, no matter where they are.
Wow.
That's the kind of data we're talking about. And then AI comes in to like make sense of it all.
So the AI is like a detective basically going through all this evidence, looking for clues that a human might miss.
Exactly. AI algorithms can spot patterns, that might point to something suspicious, like if a tanker suddenly changes direction or turns off its transponder or just hangs out in a weird spot.
So it's like a digital bloodhound sniffing out these shadow
Yeah,
tankers.
it's like a high-tech game of cat and mouse out there on the open ocean.
But is it actually working? Is this tech helping to like bring these shadow operators to justice?
It's definitely making a difference because now we've got hard evidence of these illegal activities. It's helping to lift the veil of secrecy that's been protecting the shadow fleet for so long, bringing some transparency to this super murky market.
So shining a light on the cockroaches.
Yep. Exactly. And this information is being used to pressure governments and regulators to actually do something about it. Like insurance companies are using this data now to decide if they even want to insure ships that might be involved in the shadow fleet.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, they don't want to take on that risk.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about making it harder for anyone to even want to get involved in this shady business.
Right. It's about changing the game, making the stakes higher for anyone thinking about cutting corners and breaking the law.
Love it. And you said this data is also being used to figure out the financial side of things too, right? Like all those complex money trails.
Absolutely. Investigators are using it to trace the money and figure out who's actually profiting from this illegal trade so they can hold them accountable.
It's like following the breadcrumbs back to Hansel and Gretel.
Exactly. You got to find out who's really pulling the strings.
This is also fascinating, but I want to step back for a second and think about the bigger picture here. We've talked about the economics, the environment, but what about the politics? How does this shadow trade affect the balance of power globally?
That's a great question. And the truth is, the shadow fleet isn't just an economic or environmental issue. It's a total game changer on the geopolitical stage. It's allowing Russia to flex its muscles and exert its influence in ways that just wouldn't be possible with the sanctions in place.
So it's a way for them to basically say, hey, we're still here to the west.
Exactly. They're showing that they can't be easily isolated or controlled. And by offering cheap oil to countries in Africa and Asia, even parts of Europe, they're building new alliances and strengthening old ones.
Like they're creating their own little club.
Yeah, a club that plays by its own rules, and that raises some serious questions about the future of global order,
Yeah, like can sanctions even work in a world where you've got all these shadow networks popping up?
That's the million-dollar question. Do we need new tools, new strategies to deal with these players who are operating outside the system?
It's a whole new world out there.
It is. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the shadowy world of Russian oil, I want to leave you with this thought. The shadow fleet isn't just a symptom of what's going on in the world right now. It's a sign of things to come as the world becomes more interconnected and yet also more divided. We're going to see more of these shadow networks emerge in all sorts of industries operating outside the normal rules and regulations. It's a trend that we need to pay attention to, scrutinize, and ultimately work together to address.
That's a powerful thought and a call to action, for sure. We need to be aware of what's happening, understand the forces at play, and have these tough conversations to find solutions. And that's what the deep dive is all about. So until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember the shadows can only thrive where there is no light.